Alrighty, welcome back everyone to our weekly WPAMA series. My name is Ali Nimmons. I'm going to be your host for today. In case you don't know, this is a weekly series hosted by WP Buffs, where we round up your questions on a specific topic every single week, and then we sit down with a really cool person to answer them live. So if you're just tuning in and you have some questions that you weren't able to send in ahead of time, please leave them in the chat. If we have time, we will get to those. And we do also do a random giveaway at the end of every single episode. So this week we are giving away one free item out of the WP Buff store. So make sure you stay until the end to see if you were chosen for that. Keep in mind, only people who have signed up with us can win that giveaway. So go to WP-AMA-series to sign up if you are not already, and you might win a future prize. This episode will be available to watch here on our YouTube channel if you miss any portion of it. We do have 8 other episodes in the WP AMA playlist that you can go and check out if you'd like. And captions are going to be included on this video within the next 24 to 48 hours if you need or want them. So this week, I am so excited. We are answering questions about web accessibility with Ahmed. Welcome, Ahmed.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you
Hello.
for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Before we dive into these questions,
Mhm.
let's take a few minutes and tell us. Oops, sorry. That should be muted. Tell us a little bit about you, where you are, what you do, what you love, what you like to talk about, all that sort of stuff.
Cool. Well, my background is SEO. Focus on WordPress SEO, and I've been doing that for over a decade. And in that time, get involved with WordPress community, organizing local meetups and work camps in Edinburgh. And I love speaking at work camps as well. And it just gave me a buzz for some reason. I don't know why. And I enjoy it so much. But then there's another side of me where I talk a lot about deaf awareness because I am deaf myself or hard of hearing. I'm both. And I talk about that on my website, which is hearmeoutcc.com. And I do YouTube videos and podcasts and blog posts. And this is where I open up and talk about myself, talk about my stories, vulnerability, but then share some tips and advice about anything that you need to be aware of to be more deaf accessible or deaf aware. So captions or transcript, or maybe at the workplace, what do you do? Or at some kind of event or restaurants, think you should think about that allows other people like myself to feel included and to be comfortable in that environment. So I focus a lot of energy on that. I've got 2 things going on and I should really focus on one thing, but I can't help it. But I love it. And it's because it does have the impact that I never thought it would happen around the world. Whether people who are deaf themselves and said, I feel less lonely because you have shared your story, or because of people who came up to you and said, I'm a teacher, I've got a student who's deaf, I have no idea how to help. Your website has helped me, which is amazing. It's amazing stuff like that. So hopefully I will keep on going and I will find it, well, hopefully other people will find it valuable as I continue to create content around it.
Wonderful. I love all of that. That must be so gratifying to be able to help people like that. I love that.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So let's go ahead and start with our questions. The first one that I have here on my list, uh, how important are transcripts and captions? If doing them for a video, should they be formatted a certain way since receiving information via audio versus text can come across differently?
Sure. We can talk about it for an hour, so I do not want to do that. What I would say is that I know I'm biased, but I would say captions and transcript are essential rather than a nice to have or a bonus. I would say that it should be there, edited properly, created, formatted, the whole thing.
Mhm.
And I know I'm biased and I talk about how I get a lot out of it because I've had my struggles for many years and I still have a struggle. And I know I'm going to continue to have the struggle of accessing content.
Mhm.
And captions and transcript can just fix that. And people don't realize that I'm not talking about it from my perspective, and someone who's therefore hard of hearing can benefit from it. But it would benefit so many people that you as a creator will get something out of it. People who have some kind of learning disability, maybe they're learning their language and they don't understand their language. People maybe who want to watch a video in silence. I mean, I'm sure we've all done that before, watch videos in silence. Then you want to watch it with the captions on and just keep on going. And I've seen a number that says about 85% of Facebook videos are watched in silence, which means captions will be very useful on this occasion. And we all know that there is a huge rise in videos. I mean, videos is just constantly going up in terms of the number of them available online. So people want to access them. Not need to. Obviously, there are some people who need to access certain content. There's a big debate about accessing content related to COVID. Is it accessible? Is it not? That's another conversation. But then there are people who want to and enjoy your content. And it's the same thing with transcription. If you have podcasts, then it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to access that. I understand that it's not going to be exactly the same in terms of how you speak and how you write it. But if you structure it in a way that you would write, for example, a transcript, if you structure it right, like a blog post with headings and bullet points and images and embedding everything there, you can make it as engaging. You can make it really, really enjoyable to read and consume. Same thing with caption is that it's literally writing down what the person has said. There are things they should be aware of, like for example, if there are sound effects, put it in there. If there's a change of people speaking behind the scene, put in the name of a person in bracket and what that person has said. A big one I'm always telling people is that do not censor profanity if people can hear it. It's about equal access. Because if you have someone saying profanity, but you're censoring it in the caption, well, then it's not exactly equal. You're limiting certain information, which people say, oh, it doesn't really make sense, not important. But since you're asking about, you want it to make it relevant, make it very equal, the way the person speak and the way the person write it, well, then don't censor anything. Because sometimes not everyone wants to swear, but some people swear because of emotion and they just want to convey that. So it is so essential. What I would say, we need it, but also you will get a lot of benefit out of it. People will engage with it more. There are SEO benefits to it. You get more traffic. It's a win-win for everyone. That's what I always say. Yes, it will take a bit of time and maybe a bit of money, if depending on how you do it, but the reward is amazing. And I would be a huge advocate if people caption and transcribe their content.
It's a fantastic answer. And I know too, when I first saw you speak at WordPress Accessibility Day, you had a lot of feelings about auto captioning versus, I guess, custom captioning or like by hand captioning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Ah, yes. Auto caption, also known as corruption, is what we say
I love that.
literally. That, and it is that. This is how we define auto caption, or just in general, bad quality caption. They're crap. And the reason being is because it is not accurate, it's not easy to read, and it's just created by a machine.
Mhm.
It's a good start. When you upload your videos onto YouTube, it will create auto caption, but then you can go in there and edit it. And you'll have that foundation there, and then just adjust the spelling, the grammar, put in everything that you need to put in there as accurate as possible. Then it will become a really good quality caption.
Mhm.
But the thing is, auto caption is not accurate. It's not fun to read. It is really, really is a pain in the ass when I see it, and like I can't enjoy videos with auto caption. It just can't.
Yeah.
And big part of it is because it's not accurate, and it will. I believe it will never be 100% accurate, but I always believe that it will require human intervention to get in there and do the necessary editing.
Mhm.
What I would say is there are people who care about YouTube SEO or the video SEO. Auto caption, when it's created, it's not really readable by Google on YouTube. But if you upload or you edit the auto caption and then you publish that, then you have made it a lot more easier for Google to understand what your video is about. On top of everything else, your title, description. So it's so important that you manually edit it.
Mhm.
I really, really want to emphasize when people say, can you put captions on? Do not say the auto caption there already. It's almost as bad as not having it at all, especially if for people who are more profoundly deaf, then it's really, really bad.
Mhm.
And I have to fill in the gap sometime when it's like not spelling right or I don't know what that person said and I just switch between the two. But for those who really require it, then you're not really doing enough justice and you're not really allowing them to access your content. Like I said, we want to and sometimes we need to. So let's not just depend on auto caption. You're missing out on a lot and we're missing out on a lot as well.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Like since seeing that talk you did, you ruined auto captions for me. I'll say that. Like previous to that, if there was a video I was watching that had the auto captions and they weren't that great, I just was kind of like, oh, whatever. But now it bothers me. I'm like, you have like millions of subscribers maybe on YouTube, like this person I'm watching, and you can't pay $1 a minute to like get real captions. That's kind of ridiculous.
Even
So
less than that, you don't have to pay $1 a minute. I mean, if it's too much and it can add up, you can use again automated tools to create it for you for like
mhm,
10 cents a minute, or I think there are some around that. But again, you have to get in there and edit it.
right.
So if it's $1 a minute, and I think whatever is like $1.25, which is it adds up. If it's too much, you can still get it done for free on YouTube,
Yeah.
or you can still use these tools and get it done for like 10 cents up to 25 cents a
Mhm.
minute, which is pretty good,
Yeah.
I
There's
think.
options for
Yeah.
sure. Wonderful. Okay, so let's hit the next question. So, question number 2, is there a bigger benefit to doing sign language interpretation or over or in addition to captioning? So, I guess they're asking like an and or sign language versus captioning. Which one would you recommend? Sign language interpretation seems harder to deliver due to lack of available resources.
Got it. So this is where one thing I have to explain, people will think about why do you require a sign language interpreter when you have captions?
Hmm.
People need to understand that for if we're going to use English, spoken English, versus either American Sign Language, British Sign Language, yes, there are hundreds of them, FYI, it's not one sign language. There are two completely different languages. People who have grown up learning sign language will have their own grammar, their own syntax, and the way you look at a sentence is completely different to the way it's written, how we understand it.
Hmm.
Those who are more oral in terms of their language, spoken English or otherwise around the world. And there are a lot of people saying, oh, what's the point of sign language interpreters if you have caption? Well, it's because people whose first language is sign language, they will not necessarily understand the written format because it's a completely different language to them. It's
Yeah.
not like for like. It's so, so important that people understand that. For example, if you say, my name is Ali in our language, in spoken English, but in sign language, I'm not sure about ASL, maybe ASL is different, but we say in BSL, it's something along the line of name my Ali or something along that line. I can't
Hmm.
remember off the top of my head. So it's completely different.
Yeah.
So that's one thing people say, oh, what's the point? Well, there are reasons to do it.
Hmm.
Should you do it? Well, I would ask first because you don't know what people are looking for, what people don't look for. I would always say the bare minimum, absolutely. I would say captions and transcriptions, they are the bare minimum.
Hmm.
If you do have resources to do extra, great. But then I would open up that conversation to the community. And do you think it's needed? Because there's no point throwing all your resources if nobody needs it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there will be people who need it. I think there will be. If there are, then you will need to sit down together and think about how can you deliver that. Should you deliver that, for example, you have your video and then the small box at the bottom, you have the interpreter? Or should you have the video as normal and in a completely separate video is the interpreter? Maybe you have it on Vimeo or something. Who
Hmm.
knows? There are different ways of doing it. There's no perfect way at all. I would always ask about that because the difficulty with using sign language interpreter is that there are hundreds of them around the world. So then what should you focus on? Now, it makes sense, for example, for me, it makes sense for my website to say, okay, I am in the UK, so I should focus on British Sign Language.
Mm-hmm.
But at least half of my traffic and community is based in the US. So using British Sign Language is a waste of time for those who require American Sign Language.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't just throw my money in there. I would just have to ask the question, would you find it useful? Would you find it useful? And then see how you can do it, because it will require cost. And we should always appreciate the skills that interpreters can provide, especially authentic ones, certified, registered. And those who are, example, maybe those who are Black, they can relate to a certain topic about Black history, for example, or someone who's maybe more Asian relate to that kind of culture.
Mm-hmm.
That also adds to it. So don't just jump in there and do it. Ask the question, ask the local deaf community, talk to interpreters, get all information before you decide to jump into and do it. Always ask first.
Wonderful. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Like with anything, do your research and make the strongest decision that you can based on the data that you find. It makes total sense.
Yep.
Alrighty. So we talked a little bit about tools. Like I know we mentioned Rev versus other ones. But the next question is, what is the best accessibility tool or plugin that you think is the best to make websites ADA compliant? So we haven't really touched on ADA compliance at all. We were talking about captions and transcripts. So maybe first let's explain for anyone who doesn't know what ADA compliance is or means, and then love to hear your recommendations on tools or plugins that can help somebody make their website ADA compliant.
Sure. So obviously this is US only. So American Disability Act is what ADA stands for. And the general essence, because obviously it's a complex piece of act to look at in detail, is that you should have an attempt to make reasonable attempt to make your website and everything else around it, your restaurant, your business, everything, make reasonable attempt to make it accessible. And this is where it gets a bit complicated, because we have something similar in the UK. I think it's the Equality Act. I can't remember what it's called. And it's similar concept. It's like you should always put in reasonable attempt to make your office accessible for those who are wheelchair users and other, disability. But this is the problem. It's very subjective. Some people will say, oh, that's reasonable enough. Auto caption will do. And I would say, no, that's not reasonable enough. So it's really, really hard to get people to say you have to make reasonable attempt when it's quite subjective. And I personally believe the legislation should be a bit tighter in terms of what should people do legally. So that aside, one thing I should point out to people is that accessibility, especially web accessibility, is a huge, huge topic. I'm the first person to say I am not a web accessibility expert. When I talk about accessibility, I'm talking about content, especially around deaf accessibility. Whereas web accessibility, there are experts out there who can do the job, and that's not for me in terms of making website compliant, making it easy, for example, those who use screen readers to just use the website. And little things would be like, make sure you have alt text in your images. And that's a little thing. And there are so many things around that you should do. For example, make sure you have certain action label in your buttons so that people who use screen readers, they know where to go, and that's where they go to click the call to action. It's such a big topic. So if you want to use a plugin, I don't know the best one. There are plenty out there. What I would say is that a plugin does not make your website 100% accessible. You still require the experts who want to or who can implement it. You require them. And you should also test it with people who require it, people who will use, for example, screen readers.
Yeah.
A plugin will not provide that solution alone. It can help. It can provide that maybe stopgap, especially those who are, resources quite difficult. But you should always reach out to the web accessibility experts out there who know what they're talking about, and they will guide you away. Just please don't assume that a plugin will fix everything for you. It just won't.
Yeah, agreed. So it sounds like the best tool is hiring somebody or working with a company or a freelancer who can consult and point out the things that either you can improve in yourself or maybe they can do it for you.
Totally. I
Yeah.
think that applies to any plugin. So if you, for example, SEO plugins, the two
Mhm,
big ones, Yoast and All-in-One SEO,
mhm.
you can install them and then, okay, you get to work. But we all know that when you install it, it doesn't mean that your website is automatically optimized.
I wish.
We wish. No, I don't wish. I would be out of a job. But but it's just what I'm trying to say is that human will always have to be involved in these things. So
Yeah.
SEO plugins, you still have to have the expert to help you. Web accessibility, yes, install a plugin if you want to, but you still need someone to get in there.
Mhm,
So it applies to any topic. You can't just use a plugin to fix a problem. An expert, in most occasion, can do a better job than a plugin because it's more personal and you
mhm.
can really make an impact in terms of if you know a specific problem, you can fix that specific problem that a plugin might not be able to. But it's a good point. I agree with you on that.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So, question number 4. How has the conversation around accessibility been changed or affected by quarantine and everything being virtual? It's a good one.
I think I've touched a little bit on the issues for people who require sign language interpreters.
Hmm.
So in the UK, it's a big, big problem. There's a popular hashtag going on. It's called hashtag where is the interpreter?
Hmm.
And it's mainly aimed at Downing Street. And there's a huge campaign by the deaf community in the UK asking the government, where is the interpreter when you're doing your briefings?
Hmm.
And the deaf community had asked that question back in March. And we're still to this day, when they do their briefing, still don't have it. And they require
Wow.
other people to translate that. Because, like I said, caption is not enough. It's not their first language. The sign language, their first language, completely different.
Hmm.
For some reason, this is an issue in the UK. And you think in a country where, it's a developed country, we have resources, and I can understand other countries, not so easy, totally get it. But in UK, you would think that would be okay.
Yeah.
It's still a problem. A lot of other countries are doing a lot of better job. To be fair, within the UK, the like of Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, they're actually doing better. It's
Hmm.
just the main government in England, they're not doing that. But what I have seen other countries, they're doing very, very well. And in the US, I think it's state dependent. A lot of the time they are doing that in local briefings. But then when it comes to the main one, the White House briefing, then it's not there. That's another argument. So if you can imagine, how would it feel? I ask this question to everyone. It's been a tough time, been so confusing, really difficult to get through. How would you feel if you had been deprived of information? You'd be so stressed out.
Yeah.
Everyone. That's exactly how deaf people feel right now. Still, after 6, 7 months, they're kind of being deprived of information
Yeah.
and they're reliant on interpreters doing translation pro bono.
Mm.
And they're just given the time to do that when that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
But they've been deprived of critical information that we all deserve to have access to,
Yeah.
but they've not been given that. For what reason? I have no idea. They're just being ignored or denied or resources or money. I don't know. They
Hmm.
haven't really been upfront about it
Hmm.
in lots of countries around the world. So it's a shame, and they're still fighting for that. And this is why, on a less serious circumstance, if I'm talking about a cooking YouTube channel, then we want to access that for fun because we want to have that same equal access like everyone else. But when it comes to information like COVID and quarantine and all these things, this is actually essential.
Yeah. Public health information. It's not really
Exactly.
optional.
Exactly. It's not that we want it, but we need it.
Yeah.
Not me personally, because I don't require sign language, but for those who do,
Yeah.
they need it. So it's been very difficult, and I've been trying my best to talk about it. I have interviewed the person who started the hashtag
Oh,
campaign, where
wow.
it's interpreter, talk to you about it, just to help raise that awareness and push it out there. But it's really, really difficult, unfortunately. So it can't come soon enough that they, like the rest of us, we all deserve equal access to information.
Mhm. Agreed. Wow. I had no idea that that was such an issue, and it's so weird that they're not even saying why. Like, to not even address it or explain it in any way. It's such a weird thing to, like, dig
You
your
think
heels
so?
in.
You
Yeah,
think so?
right?
I mean, there's an essence of like being a bit PR about it. It's like we value the contribution of everyone in the UK who require this information. Blah 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 blah. It's just that PR talk is
Mm,
always there, but it doesn't really work. You know, we're all seeing through that.
yeah.
There's no information. We don't know why. We don't know why, and it's not just the UK. Other parts of the world, it's exactly the same thing. And unfortunately, in the part of the word where they do have it, people mock it, or people say, "Why do we have it? Just use the captions. The captions there is enough. We don't need a person interpreting behind the scene or in a separate screen in the box below. That's so annoying. It's just intrusive." And this is like public health information,
Yeah.
public announcement. This is critical information. People still complain. And again, this is why I have to talk about what I talk about when I say, for example, caption is not enough. If people require sign language, it's for a reason. It's not
Mhm.
like for like. But people don't know that. People say, why do we need interpreters when we have captions? Well, it's because they're two different things.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, there are people out there who are complaining when they see interpreters on the screen for public information. They're complaining that it shouldn't be there. It's
That is
just
stupid.
a constant battle that we get all have to do and talk about and raise awareness and make sure people understand it's not that straightforward. There's a reason behind it. So
It's also like it doesn't affect you if there's a person doing sign language in the court. How is that interfering with your ability? Like,
apparently it does.
I remember going to this is obviously different from public health information, but I remember going to a concert years ago, and there was a sign language interpreter at the side of the stage doing sign language, and like she was super into it, like dancing along with the music. And I found myself looking at her, not because she
Hmm.
was just distracting, but because I thought it was so cool. Like
Yeah.
I'd never considered that as a possibility before. Um and yeah, like I can't understand how somebody would be like, "Oh, that's annoying." Like people are stupid.
Apparently it affects their life. I don't know. I don't know how it affects their life in some way. It's like, woe is me. I don't understand that.
So
But
sensitive.
but you're right. When you look at the professionals doing it at concerts,
Hmm.
it's amazing, and it's years of hard work, and it's so much studying, and it's a skill and a talent, and it's a qualification. It's all of it and beyond.
Yeah.
And people don't understand how hard it is to do that. I've seen someone doing interpreting for, I think it's Twister and Buster Rhyme together. Now they talk fast.
Yeah, they are fast.
They are fast. So that person, she was like mind blowing. I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, how? Because I'm
Yeah,
learning British Sign Language, and I'm thinking, nah, I can't even reach that level.
that's
And
crazy.
then people argue, then what's the point of that? Why are deaf people in the concert? They can't hear that. They can't hear that. Again, you have to explain that. Deaf people can hear some things. Some people can't hear everything.
Yeah.
Those who are very profoundly deaf, then they actually, there's a reason why they're very close to the speaker, is because they can feel the music.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
when you combine the feeling of the music with looking at the sign language interpreter, well, then you have the experience of accessing that music like everyone else. So the
Yeah.
person who asked the question about how can you make it the same if you're doing a audio-based content, how can you make it, interpret it the same way in the captions and transcript? There are ways of doing it. In a concert format, where you're going to have the attendees close to the speakers so they can feel it and they can watch your interpreter, then that's it. You've got that experience just like everyone else. Yes, it's adjusted,
Hmm.
but it's the same thing. It's like they have that. joy.
Yeah.
But people complain, and it's like, oh, it's another story.
Well,
Another
that
story.
actually kind of dovetails nicely into the next question. You mentioned you were starting to learn British Sign Language.
Mm-hmm.
Alec in the chat asks, what is your recommended resource if somebody wants to start to learn sign language?
Well, this is the thing. My question is which sign language, because there
There you
are
go.
hundreds across the world, and people think, wow, really? And I love it when people say, that doesn't make sense. Why are there 100? There should be one sign language. My answer to them then, well, what's the point of having different languages spoken around the world? We should all have just one spoken language across the world. What's the point? Same concept. So what's the recommended resources? Number one, what language you want to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And the easiest thing to say would be whatever country that you're in,
Mm-hmm.
then you go for that country. So in the future, I think I will be interested to learn American Sign Language. But right now, there's no point because I'm not around deaf people who are American
Right.
and that's their language. I'm around British Sign Language speakers. If you're looking for resources, the best thing to do is ask the local deaf community. And there are local deaf communities everywhere. Some might be bigger than others, some might be smaller than others. They will be able to guide you in terms of website, who to look at, who to trust, who to watch that can give you the right information. And what I always say is that follow the guidance of people who are deaf themselves
Mm-hmm.
instead of following hearing people who just do it on the side or for fun or looks beautiful or whatever. There's a lot of anger at the moment of cultural appropriation where hearing people only learn sign language for the social clouds,
Yeah.
which is when they want to interpret music or song in sign language for social media engagement. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not the reason you should do that. And the problem is people then say to them, oh, they're amazing, they're amazing. And they go to them for advice, they go to them for everything. And that's not the right people to go to. You should go to
Yeah.
people who are native or as close to native as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the one who will be able to help you the best way possible. And you're using the right resources because deaf people are less likely to get jobs and they are oppressed and these things. So you kind of supporting that by going to them. You're supporting them as well. People who are just wanting to teach, but people going to hearing people who have learned it for like 1 month and they know the ABC. No, that's not that's
Yeah.
not the way to do it. So go to the local deaf community. First of all, which one? Local country. I think that's what you should focus on, your country-based sign language. Then go to the local deaf community, find it online, whether it's Facebook groups or otherwise, ask questions. Then they'll guide you. Just listen to the right people. You can't go wrong with that.
Great answer. I love that. Okay. Next question. Again, asking for a resource recommendation. What are your favorite resources for learning about the best ways to make content accessible? So maybe that's like YouTube channels, Facebook groups, like you mentioned, blogs. Where could somebody go today if they wanted to start really upping their knowledge about accessible content?
So I will do a shameless plug. I'm just gonna I put my website in there. So
We love shameless plugs.
so what I do on I talk about it myself and I haven't really gone to anyone because I'm using my decade of life experience of
Mhm.
what I need. I have been dependent on captions since I could read.
Yeah.
So I know what a good quality caption looks like, what I need. We can get very technical, we can get very, very detailed in terms of legal requirements and stuff like that. I wouldn't go that far ahead. Let's just start with the basic and things like that. So on my website or my YouTube channel, there are categories just focused only on caption and transcript. And I talk in there about what's the difference between closed caption and open caption, or how to write transcript and what you should think about, and all these little things. I've got it there on my website. And for me, that would be one place you can go. And I don't know where are other places that you can go who would provide that. There might be people like, for example, rev.com or AI Media. They both measure transcription and captioning companies. And I think there's another one called 3Play Media as well. They all have useful resources on their blogs about how to caption all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm using, yeah, I look at these people as well, but I'm using my own life experience on what we require, and that's how I do it, and that's what I find useful.
Mm-hmm.
It's there on the website. You can check it out there and on my YouTube channel.
Perfect. I love it. And just to be clear, after we finish the live recording right now, I'm going to go ahead and update the YouTube description box with links to all the stuff we mentioned and talk about. So if you're watching this later, look down below and you can find all that sort of stuff. Next question. Okay, cool. I put that there. I'm excited about this question. So when looking at WordPress, right, as a CMS, as a builder, can we talk about the pros and cons of WordPress for accessibility? So how does using WordPress over another website builder help make your content, or help you provides you with the tools that you can use to make your content more accessible? And are there any things about using WordPress that limit you in that capacity?
Got it. So a lot of the answer would be the thing that we mentioned earlier about getting experts in and making your content accessible. That's a big part of it. There's no point me repeating that. As a CMS, there's not really much that I believe in terms of deaf accessibility that WordPress as a CMS can do, because a lot of it is down to you manually captioning your videos. That's nothing to do with the CMS. CMS can't do that for you. You have to do it yourself on YouTube or Vimeo, whatever platform that you're using. And then when you're creating transcript, then you're using tools to do that for you, and then you put it on the editor of the CMS. So what I'm getting from the question is that that's really mainly focused on web accessibility in a broader sense, rather than what I'm talking about, which is content or deaf accessibility.
Right.
So there isn't really much I can say about that, because I know that the experts out there, and we know that there's the WordPress Make accessibility group. They focus a lot on that topic as well, heavily.
Yeah.
And I've been talking with people around that. So they are the best people to talk to you about that. They know what they're talking about. There's been a lot of debates around Gutenberg and how accessible it is and how it is not. That was a very big topic in the earlier days, and it still is today. It's a big topic. But those people will know better than me about why that is. But when it comes to making your content accessible, well, the CMS, the only thing I can think of that you have a direct input in is just to make sure when you upload the images, fill in the alt text and fill in your titles and description. The alt text is the most important one. Maybe if that was more obvious, or maybe if that was something that should be compulsory rather than optional,
Right.
then it will force people to write it in. That's an idea out there for me in terms of accessibility for content. But when it comes to videos and podcasts, it's kind of outside the CMS that you kind of put it together and then put it in. So it's a little bit different from my expertise, really.
I like what you said about like making the alt text compulsory somehow. I remember a while ago there was a plugin floating around that I can't remember what exactly it did, but it was something along those lines where it kind of maybe like it checked against Google and it would automatically fill in, like it would find that image elsewhere if it had an alt text and like fill that in. I don't know if that actually exists or if I just made that up, but that would be something I would love to use or see evolve, because I would assume that it would need a lot of work to make that actually work and be useful. But people use Unsplash images constantly.
Sure.
So if all of those images automatically have alt text and you upload one, it would be really cool, right, to have a plugin that would search that like through Google and just grab that alt text and pop it in. Would that be useful, or do you think that kind of removes, like we were talking about before, it removes that human element, it removes the context, and the relationship between that image and the rest of the content, right?
I would put that on the same level as auto caption, because you're using machines to put it in. If you got that base, you got that foundation, as long as you check it manually, then why not? But if people just leave it to the machine to do everything automatically for them, I think it will create problems in the long run.
Yeah.
And a very, very simple example would be, imagine the image from Unsplash or whatever. Imagine the image is the two images, there are animals
Mm-hmm.
on both images. One is a black cow, and then the other one is a close up of another animal that maybe Google will think, oh, that looks like a cow as well, but it's not a cow. It's just, it's not perfect, the AI machine, to understand what the image is, what that image is. It's getting
Yeah.
a lot better. When you look at how it's done, it's so much better. But if we're ever going to be dependent on machine to caption, transcribe, alt text, all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
we have to check manually as well. Just like when we create any content, just like if you want to write a book, a blog post, anything, you get someone to check it for you, like an editor. It's
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think whatever we do, if we rely on the machine, don't just leave it to the machine to do 100% of a job. It will assist you, and then we'll take it from there.
Makes total sense. Let me just pop this last question in the chat because I forgot to do that. And then we are on our last question. So if there's anybody watching who has a question, pop it in the chat for me so I can grab it and we can talk about it. So the last question that I have on my list right now, which I think we've touched on a little bit, but basically, what is the relationship between SEO and accessibility?
Oh yes. Well, I've touched about it on YouTube, and yes, definitely. If your videos are captioned, then YouTube and Google can read your caption. It's easier to understand what the video is about,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. You've got that for your accessibility and your SEO. The same thing with podcasts. What people tend to do when they launch a podcast is that they put it on a blog post, they embed the podcast player,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe links to resources, and then that's it. But if you have transcription at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
then obviously that's a lot better for Google to understand what that page is about.
Yeah.
It's just so much easier for them to understand that than to go in the podcast player, which they can't do. It's impossible. They just can't do that. So that's another way to combine both SEO and accessibility. And by the way, if you're going to do a transcription, don't just copy and paste and then just dump it in and that's it. Optimize it further. Get the headings in. Use subheadings.
Mm.
Use images and optimize the images and make them accessible. Embed videos as well. Doing all that will then raise your optimization to another level compared to just copy and paste. Done. No. Treat the transcription with respect. I would always say that transcription should be treated in the same way as a regular blog post. Do the same thing that you do with a blog post, like you do a transcription in terms of formatting,
Mm-hmm.
internal links, bold and italic, everything. So again, that's another way to combine both accessibility and SEO. And that will obviously help with engagement and stuff like that, which, if you can imagine, if a transcript is just one big chunk of text, it's
Mm-hmm.
not pleasant to look at.
Mm-mm.
Most of the time, if you see it, you'll be like, I'm out of here. I'm not reading that. I'm gone. And it's just not scannable. People like to scan content as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're being less patient now, where we like quickly scan, head in, read that, scan. But if it's just like one big block of text, nobody's going to be that.
Yeah.
Guaranteed, nobody's going to be that. And so that's YouTube, and that's transcription, and YouTube and podcast. And already you tick all the boxes in terms of accessibility and SEO.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wanted to, you can still repurpose your content other ways. So you can use your caption to repurpose it into a transcript. You can use a transcript to repurpose it into a standalone blog post if you wanted to, whatever it is. That's why I'm saying that it ticks all the boxes in terms of the most important people will have access to it, which is the users, the visitors, the customers, the viewers,
Mm-hmm.
all these people, they will have access to it. That's number one priority. Google will have access to it, and search engine, they will access your content. Great.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will benefit from that because you're getting more people liking it, and you're getting Google liking it, well, then there you go.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of a beautiful marriage between SEO and accessibility. They do cross over. And even though I hate saying that you should make your website accessible because you get money or you get traffic or visitors, that shouldn't be your number one reason. If that's your reason, then you have to question, like, why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing it for that. You should do it because you believed it's right. That's the number one priority. If you
Hmm.
believe it's right, then the knock-on effect is just amazing.
Yeah.
You will get the benefit in the long run. But like I said, the priority, number one priority, are the people who are consuming your content. That's who you should focus on. If you do that, then the SEO and accessibility will gradually fall into place as well.
Yeah. I love that. And I've said that same exact thing many times before because I'm fairly vocal in this community about diversity, primarily for women and people of color in the community. And I've had people kind of make that argument about, oh, diverse teams are better performing and more efficient. And I've said the same thing where it's like, okay, if that's the reason why you're looking for diversity, yeah, your priorities are probably not in the best place that they could be. And I
Totally.
mean, all of this, what we're talking about, I think falls under the umbrella of diversity, right? It's people with different viewpoints and experiences that coming together makes a more rich environment. And yeah, I completely agree that it's it's always about the human element first, and
Totally.
anything else is a perk, it's a benefit, it's you know positive unintended consequence. But I think when you put the people first, all those other things fall into place.
You can't go wrong with putting people first in any format, in any way of the word. If a company put people first, like the employees, the company will get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
If we put people first with our content, we will get a lot out of it as well. So people first is maybe is the best strategy for a lot of companies out there. So I totally agree with you on that. It should not be because of PR.
Mm.
That's where then I'll be thinking, so are you doing it for PR, or are you doing it because you feel like it's important, it's
Yeah,
part of your
the right thing to do.
ethos and your culture? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on that. You shouldn't be saying, oh, we have our team diverse because we need to meet the quota. Like, quota? Nah.
Mm-mm.
Nah, that's not the right reason for having a diverse team. Just like it's not
But
the right reason for have accessible content. It's because, oh, we can get lots of engagement. No.
yeah, I will say I'm a fan of measurable goals. So,
Good.
like
Yep.
when, I've organized an event before where I've said, I'd like us to have these percentages. And people pushed back because they were like, well, we don't want to have a quota. We don't want to accept somebody as a speaker just to meet a number. And I think there's a difference between having to meet a quota and recognizing the fact that you have um, an existing environment that is made up of a certain percentage of different types of people
Mhm.
and aiming toward that representation as equal. You know what I mean? um I'm trying to think, the whole issue you were talking about not having the interpreter as there to talk about the public health information. It just seems so ridiculous because I'm sure that when they look at the percentage of the individuals who need that information, it's not like you have a country of 5 million people and 6 of them need an interpreter.
Mhm.
It's a much bigger number than that. So
Absolutely.
meeting that quota makes all the sense in the world.
It does. And I don't know the number for the US in terms of number of people who are deaf or hard of hearing. I have no idea. However, globally, hundreds of millions. And I've read somewhere it's like 5% of a word. I think it's more than that.
Mhm.
In the UK, I believe it's 1 in 5 people in the UK, or 1 in 6, or 1 in 5,
Mhm.
are deaf in some way, whether it's moderate or profound, whatever it is. And that's millions, millions and millions. And even if we're talking about like sign language interpreter for those who require it for public health information,
Mhm.
okay, that's one thing that's important. But we still need captions as well for the other people, the other
Right.
millions and millions of people who require the information as well, but they are mainly speaking English
Mhm.
orally, not sign language. But if the auto caption or if the caption itself is incorrect or it's
Mhm.
just not accurate, then you're denying them information as well. So, if we're going to talk about the quota in terms of protecting people, it's a lot of people,
Yeah.
and why would you complain about making sure that as many people as possible have access to the critical information? I mean, we're talking about WordPress and CMS and making sure your content optimized, but it's another story when we're talking about, life and death.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Whether it's national disaster or whether it's pandemic, whether it's, terrorism or whatever, you have to have access to the information.
Yeah, totally. I just did a quick Google search because I was curious. In the US, it's 1 out of every 20 people are considered deaf or hard of hearing.
So over 300 million people in the US, I think it's
Hmm.
something like that. It's the population, 1 in 20. So we're talking, is that 60? I think it's 60
I'm so
million. I
bad
think
with
so.
math. I'll believe
Um,
whatever you say.
quick calculation there. Okay, I think it's
Still a
60
lot.
million. Yeah.
It's still a lot.
Imagine they don't have information. I mean, is that really the best thing to do?
Not
No,
really.
no, exactly. So it just, I don't understand it myself, why it's going on. And that's why I do what I do. I have to speak about it and I have to be vocal about it.
Hmm.
All my life, I've been very silent about what I'm going through because I used to be embarrassed or ashamed, or the environment I was in was not very open, maybe not very
Hmm.
diverse. I was as well. And then I realized it's actually making things more difficult, and that's why I've been more open about it over the past few years, and just showing my face on the internet and talking about it on the internet because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah.
It's one thing to make sure that your video about how to cook is optimized and has caption, but it's another to make sure that the information about public health is available for every single person.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter who you are, every single person deserves it.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad that you've decided to be more vocal and be an advocate for your community because I think it's extremely important. And it's extremely important to, I think, in the world we live in right now, something I try to focus a lot on is to not fault people for their ignorance, but fault them for their reluctancy to learn. And
Sure.
so I think that when you can work to educate people and they can meet you there, right, and then take that information and go off themselves, we don't know what we don't know. So like I remember at WP Accessibility Day, I went 28 years and I did not know the difference between capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. It's not something I ever would have thought to look up, but I
Mhm.
learned that and it made me look at that situation a little bit differently. And so I'm always grateful to people like yourself who see that the rest of the world is ignorant and decide to step up and be that educational resource and do it in a way that's fun, because the presentation that I saw you in when I first encountered you was extremely funny, and I never would have. I think most people don't think of these kinds of conversations or these types of topics as something fun or funny to learn about. We think of it a little bit taboo, and we don't really want to talk about it. We don't want to make people feel awkward or make them feel bad. And so I really appreciate that you talk about these sorts of things in a very accessible and approachable way and format.
I mean, likewise, I'm so grateful that people engage with it. They can kind of relate to it. And
Mhm.
when you watch it and then you approach me and then you told me about what you've learned from it, it just makes me really happy that people are receptive to that. It's really, really cool because, as you say, we can't be critical of people all the time. So one thing I talked about with your colleague with Joe in WP Buff and with other people in terms of what is the right terminology to say whatever.
Mm.
I'm not angry if you say the wrong thing to me, especially if it's because you are willing to listen and understand. Like, got it. That's what I wanted to learn.
Mhm.
it's like what you said. If you're like saying, yeah, but I prefer this and I'm going to call you this instead because it just makes me feel more comfortable, well, then, okay, the problem is not me then, is it? So
Yeah.
it's exactly what you said. And it sounds like you're speaking from experience as well in terms of who's willing to receive information and who's willing to reject information. I can tell you speaking from experience.
I do. All right, we are nearing the end of our session time, so we're going to have to close off the conversation here, which stinks because I could talk to you about this kind of stuff for hours, but we
Totally,
don't have that time.
totally. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ahmed, so much for being here and for being so open and generous with your time. I will definitely include a link to your website in the description box below. Is there anywhere else that that people can come and find you and ask you questions and tell you how much they loved this conversation?
Well, if they love it, you can tell me all about it. I don't mind an ego boost. My social media handle is quite consistent. It's at I am Ahmed Khalifa, and that is on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and even YouTube as well. At the end of it, when you after YouTube.com, that's where you can find me. I'm just delighted that people are willing to listen to an important topic that I'm really passionate about, and it's really, really important for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world. So I appreciate everyone is listening, and thank you, Ali, for inviting me, for allowing me to just talk nonsense and on and on and on about it.
Absolutely. I use this series as a way to just rope in people that I want to talk to and talk to them about interesting topics. It's very selfish. All right. So before we head out, it's time to pick and announce our random giveaway winner. So this week, our winner is Matt. Congratulations, Matt. I have your email right here, so I will email you later on today at the email address you provided so you can go ahead and grab your prize. Make sure, all of you out there watching, that you go to wpbuffs.com/WP-AMA-series. Sign up there to get early access to the next speaker, because if you were signed up, you get an early announcement. You can submit your questions early, make sure they get answered. And if you'd like to find out more about us, go to WPBuffs.com. You can find us on social media, WPBuffs, basically everywhere. And that's all, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Lovely. Alrighty, we are